I'm here to talk about communication theory, wonderful acronym CAT, and it's a fascinating subject. It's a very big subject. We're talking about imitation, and it's often unconscious imitation, to become part of a culture, and this is called convergence. And we're sometimes talking about rejecting a culture, and this is called divergence. So communication accommodation theory was a term coined by Howard Giles at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And the roots of CAT are in social psychology and social identity theory. And obviously for our purposes, I'd like to talk about language, and specifically the English language, and how it is accepted, how it's rejected, and perhaps how it's shaping our identities. Next slide. We're also talking about power, because English is unquestionably a prestige language, and there are a few people learning English because they want to, but the majority of our learners learn English because they need to. They need it to further their career or to enable their career, or they need it because the local authorities say they need it. So English is a means to an end, and the emotional bond is often lacking. And there is also the issue of power in the classroom. Traditionally, the teacher is the authority, the expert, and the rule maker. Next slide. Thank you. English language teachers are often working in another culture, and this culture often has different expectations. So we teachers have to converge towards the culture we're working in, and we have to create our own classroom culture balanced on these cultural expectations, the learner expectations, the other stakeholders, the course purpose, of course, our own teaching style, our personality. And yes, all teachers have to do this to an extent, but I would argue that English language teachers do it more than most. So if you're training students for formal exams, then you need to teach a fairly conservative form of English. You as the teacher will probably have more say about the style of English, and the students have to converge towards this model of English if they want to pass the exam. Next slide, please. I teach in business, where the language is company or business-led. So words and phrases may be in English, but they don't mean a thing to the layperson. They have a specialist meaning within the culture of the department or the company or the business field. And if I want to teach executives, I need to converge towards their work situation. And I need to accommodate their business culture. So it's no good me saying, well, that's not very good English, and I sometimes feel like saying, because if this is the standard business usage, then so be it. So business train as power test, but we cede power linguistically. We have to converge towards the business culture. Next slide, please. So, wonderful, there we are. Back to CAT and convergence. So you have convergent CAT. I take the view that language is social. People need to communicate. They want to accommodate your meaning, and then the meaning around you becomes your world and your culture and your identity. But, of course, there is a huge difference between our teaching situation and first language learning, and I would argue that this difference is mainly an issue of identity and emotion. The convergence. A lot of convergence is unconscious. Children imitate their parents to learn speech, and obviously there is a very strong emotional bond there. Not all unconscious convergence is great. We all know that feeling when we're moving with somebody who has a rather irritating turn of phrase, and first we notice it, and then we get irritated by it, and then we find ourselves using that turn of phrase, that word. And this tendency we have to converge linguistically is even used as a tool for manipulation. by some religious cults, and some people say by some corporate cultures. The theory is that you're so brainwashed by the in-language that you are incapable of communicating outside the organisation, and then you're dependent on the organisation. So this is a type of linguistic slavery based on our willingness to accommodate. But most convergence isn't that sinister. A lot of you will be bilingual or even polylingual, and you will have noticed that when you speak to somebody with your own language pairs, you often speak a mishmash of the two languages. You can't stick to one. This is you basically taking the best out of both worlds. This language says it better, you've only experienced it in that language. It's a sign of linguistic convergence. Your mishmash, which of course the other person understands because you're communicating, it's a new code within your mutual bilingual or polylingual culture. Next slide, please. Emails. Next slide. The received wisdom with email writing, thank you, is that we teach a nice conservative email style, and I think this suits our English cultural sensibilities, and this is power again. We start off with a bit of small talk, and then the message is masked in polite phrases, and then there's what I call the wind down at the end. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. And writing emails like this is massively time-consuming, and it doesn't happen. So we decided to examine what does happen. My students examined each other's emails. We were looking to check the level of communication within a chain and the strategies used. And my students themselves noticed that the two or more email correspondents in the chain started off with their own writing style. Someone was long-winded, someone was direct. And then they started to adopt the feature of each other's emails. They echoed words and phrases, they got shorter, they got longer. Within the space of 5 or 6 emails, they had converged, and they had created a culture within each email because they needed to communicate. Next slide, please. So, are we teaching our students a model of English that's too cumbersome and too difficult for their purposes? Hopefully not. Let's assume that we're all teaching the students the appropriate English for their purpose. Very, very quickly, this has already been touched on before today, the discussion about course books, which is a massive resource for most English lessons. I don't use them, so I'm qualified to talk about them. I think that the smaller indie publishers and writers are coming up with the better stuff that ESP at least. They're moving faster, they're able to specialise more, they can converge faster. And I think we should be supporting them more. Next slide, please. Next slide is nice, but it's actually divergent. Here's the danger. By failing to engage with our students in class, we may be contributing to their divergence and their rejection of the language. And when students reject the language, you have a problem, you know this. They disturb the lesson, they start speaking in their own language, and they get the others to converge with that, and they form an anti-culture within your class culture, which is not conducive to language level. On a wider linguistic level, I live in Germany, and I'm shocked when I read that the level of German in Turkish communities is lower now than it was a generation ago within the same families. This means that Turkish immigrants came over in the 1950s and 60s, and they learnt German, and they attempted to integrate, and then for whatever reason, the integration didn't happen. And by the third generation, young Turks were seeking another social identity outside German culture, and you could see this in their language skills. So when people say immersion is the best way to learn a language, I say it only works if you can develop a social identity for yourself within the language. You don't have to abandon your own culture. You need to bring your old and your new culture together to form a new entity. And by the way, the official international language of ISIS seems to be English, so we could be in danger of becoming the language of the enemy in some quarters. So what do we do? What a slide. What we should do, we should stop insisting on our conservative native speaking codes. Not that one, the one before. Bring back slaves. Oh no!
Well,
this is the important
time.
Ah.
Yes.
Okay. What do we do? Stop insisting on our conservative native speaking codes. Let people play with language. It's a sign of possession of language. You've found a new social identity, but have two codes. If you can't use two codes, you can't build your own identity. Thank you.